these are sort of analogous to eggs. So egg fungi is a common name for them because they look like they've got little sacks of eggs inside. And again, colors not going to help you. Ours aren't blue. Some of our slides are green, some of them are pink. But you're looking for those round structures with the dots inside. No human diseases caused by this one. Questions on that one? Okay, this is going to be a tough one. Candida albicans. This is a yeast, the one that causes human yeast infections. Okay, so different than the yeast that you looked at before that we used to make red beer and wine. We're two completely different species. It used to be easy to tell them apart because this is a picture of what some of our slides look like, the older ones that we bought a couple of years ago. All of the yeast, for some reason, are grouped together and it looks like they're flowing around a little river. Right? They're in that sort of path. That made it really easy to tell this apart from budding yeast because the budding yeast were sort of shotgun spread all over the field of view. But we bought some new slides in the last couple of years. And the Candida slides and the budding yeast slides are very similar. A lot of them are stained pink. They're little round cells. They're spread all over the field of view. So you're just going to have to spend a lot of time looking at both budding yeast and Candida to be able to tell them apart. And there's not a tip I can give you. You just have to spend time looking at both slides until you can tell them apart. I will do my best to make it as distinctive as I can if this gets put on a test. But they're both single-celled yeast. They look alike. It's just going to take practice. All right. So that is the end of Fungi Lab. Anybody have any questions before we move on to helmets? All right. Lab 5. Lab 5 for worms. Helminth is a scientific term that just means worm. It's not the name of any kind of group or kingdom. It's just a word that means worm. So figuring out where they fit in the classification system, we're in domain Eukarya, right? All the eukaryotic organisms. They're animals, so they're in kingdom Animalia. And then there are so many animals, right? We've got lizards, birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, all of that, all those different groups under the animals. Those groups are called phylum. For worms, there are actually 3 groups of worms under kingdom Animalia. We're only going to be looking at 2, the 2 that are microscopic. The third phylum contains earthworms, which obviously you can see with your naked eye, so we're not going to talk about those. Okay, so these are the 2 phylum or subgroups under kingdom Animalia that contain worms that are microscopic. So the first one, phylum Platyhelminthes, contains the flatworms, which literally looks like you smush them stomach to back. A roundworm, if you were to cut like an earthworm, let's say, and then look at the cut that you made, it would be round. Right? You cut a flatworm like with the scalpel and look at the cut that you made, they're smushed, right? They're flat from front to back. Okay, so literally flatworms. There are so many of them that they're broken into 2 groups, the trematodes and the cestodes. So this is under phylum Platyhelminthes. The trematodes are more commonly called flukes. Cestodes are more commonly called tapeworms. That's the one I'm sure you've heard of. So we'll get some more detail on those in a second. And then the second phylum of worms we're going to talk about are the nematodes, which are round. So if you were to cut them and look at the cut you made, they'd be round. Earthworms, however, are not in this category because earthworms have that repeating segments, right? They've got those little segments on their body that kind of repeat. The roundworms don't. They're smooth and round. Okay, so dog heartworms are in this category, just to give you an example of one you've heard of. Smooth roundworms. Okay, with the organization, kingdom Animalia, and 2 phylum underneath, Platyhelminthes and nematodes. So we'll start with Platyhelminthes, the flatworms, because there's so many of them. We've got 2 groups, Trematoda being the first. These are the flukes. Their common name, at least, comes from the part of the body they infect. There are blood flukes and liver flukes and everything else, right? Wherever they happen to infect, they're named by that part of the body. In general, they're monoecious. Monoecious. means that one worm has both male and female reproductive parts. It is male and female at the same time, true hermaphrodite. So fully functional, male and female parts. In general, as well, they also need an alternate host. They don't complete their life cycle in one host organism. They have to have two hosts. There's the primary host, which is usually a mammal, humans, if we're talking about a parasitic disease causer for us. And then the alternate host is the second host, necessary to complete the life cycle of the organism. Okay, so primary host is usually us, right? The human or other mammal. And the alternate host, definition for that, is the second host necessary to complete the life cycle of the worm. Second host necessary to complete the life cycle of the worm. And in general, they're parasitic with oral suckers. They attach with their mouth and feed off of whatever they're feeding off of.
I'm sorry, you said second host necessary for
To complete the life cycle of the worm. Second host necessary to complete the life cycle of the worm. All right, so again, these are just general characteristics. Most of them are monoecious, both male and female in one worm. They have two hosts to complete their life cycle, the primary, which is usually us or another mammal. The alternate host, which is another organism, usually not a mammal, necessary to complete the life cycle of the worm. And in general, they're parasitic with oral suckers. So now we're going to do a specific example of a worm in this category, phylum Pathomyces group Trematode. Schistosoma is an example, and this worm is a little bit different. It's dioecious, where most of them are monoecious, right from the last slide. This particular one is dioecious. Di means two, so two separate worms. One's male, one's female. Right, so just like us, we're dioecious as humans. We have separate male and separate female people. They have separate male and separate female worms. Humans get this one from contact with contaminated water, but you don't drink them the way you would get Giardia by drinking contaminated water. They burrow in through the skin. So you're standing in contaminated water. The alternate host, the second host for these guys, are freshwater snails. So they're the second host needed to complete the life cycle. And this is a picture of one, just so you can see it. The mouth parts, just to warn you, look round, right? So if you were to see this slide and you see that, you might say, oh, that's a roundworm. But it's Platyhelminthes. Don't look at the mouth. The mouth on all of them are round. Look at the tail end. That will tell you if it's flattened. You can tell that that's a flat worm and it's not round the whole way. And so don't focus on the mouths when you're trying to figure out which group it's in. All the mouths are round. So I've got a slide that shows you the basic life cycle. Before you get freaked out by this, you don't have to memorize all the names that are on here. Okay? You just need to know the basics of how the worm is picked up by humans and passed. So, kind of like Giardia, we're talking about a place where we don't have good, clean running water. There's not water piped into your house and then a sewage system that flushes away the waste. You're going fishing into the bathroom and doing your laundry all in the same local lake, river, that kind of scenario. So we got a guy up here fishing in the local water. This is the form of the life cycle of the schistosoma worm that burrows through the skin. Again, you don't have to know or be able to spell its name, right? But there's a form of the life cycle that burrows through the skin of the human and goes to the liver, the intestines, and the bladder, where it undergoes sexual reproduction. What gets released from the human through the eggs and feces, through the urine and feces, are eggs. So little eggs get released from urine and feces of a human or other mammal that's infected. And because the waste isn't washed away to a septic system, right, or some treatment facility, it runs back down into the same local water and develops into this form of the life cycle, which goes and lives in snail. 3 species of freshwater snail, and again, you don't have to remember that name or any of theirs, okay? But it's a different form of the life cycle that burrows into snails than burrowed into people. And while it's in the snail, it has to be in there like an incubator. The snail is the little incubator for this it will develop into the form that can grow into humans. So if all we had was this cannot infect humans, right? It's got to develop and grow and mature in the snail into the form that can then infect humans again. So this is a necessary part of their life cycle. If the snails aren't there, they can't develop and infect us. So the alternate host is different than the reservoir host for beaver fever with Giardia, right? Beavers weren't necessary. You could go people, water, people, and reinfect us. We can't go people, water, people for this one. It's not going to happen. They have to have the alternate host to complete their life cycle and be able to reinfect people. That makes sense? So that's all you need to know is the basics of the life cycle and what an alternate host is compared to a reservoir host. All right, any questions on schistosoма? All right, phylum Platyhelminthes, still the flatworms. We're in the second group now, cestodes. These are the tapeworms, cestoda. Very characteristic body style here in this picture for the tapeworms. They all have a nice round head and then a series of repeating units. The head usually has 2 eye spots. They don't see. They may possibly be able to detect light and dark. They might be able to tell it's lighter over here and darker over there, but they're not seeing shapes or color or anything like that. Okay, so very limited function on those eye spots. And then most of them have little barbs around their mouth, which would be at the top of the head. So that head region is called the scolex. It's where the eye spots and the barbs are. And so you can clearly see the eye spots and the barbs on this one. So that whole thing's the scolex. This one's smaller, but that whole round structure is the scolex. And then all of these repeating segments are called proglottids. Each one of those proglottids, each one of those boxes, is monoecious. So each box has both male and female reproductive parts in it, each segment does. And they're intended to break off from this tapeworm. Tapeworm primarily lives in the intestines of the infected organism. The scolex attaches to the lining of the intestines, and these proglottids are supposed to break off and leave with the feces. So we're talking about animals like pigs or cows that live in a field. One cow has a tapeworm, some of the proglottids break off, leave with the feces, land on the grass. The next cow comes along and eats the grass nearby, takes in the proglottids. Each one of these proglottids could attach and form its own scolex to make a whole new tapeworm. And after you've had one for a while, and they grow, they get really, really long. Right? They coil themselves up in the intestines so that if you could lay them all out flat, they'd be taller than you were, because they coil themselves up in the intestines. In Victorian times, this was a weight loss plan. You go get yourself a tapeworm on purpose, because how they feed is from absorbing food from your intestines. So no matter what you eat, they absorb the food, so you can't, right? I wouldn't recommend this as a weight loss technique, but it certainly works, because they're stealing your food before you can use it. There are lots of rumors still hanging around about tapeworms. I remember my grandpa, this was before I had any degrees in biology to correct him. I don't think I would have corrected my grandpa anyway. But saying that you could hold like an egg or something at the opening of the anus and the tapeworm would come out to get it, catch it. That doesn't happen. You'll still find that kind of thinking out there in the population. It doesn't work that way. You have to take dewormers to get rid of these things. Humans usually, of course, we're not eating the grass that the cow pooped on, right? So we're not getting them the way that cows would get them naturally in their habitat. Occasionally, instead of going into the intestines, the worm will burrow into muscle, which of course we do eat, cow meat. So that if humans are getting tapeworms, it's usually from undercooked meat where the worm has migrated into the muscle instead of in the intestines. And I should say it's very rare for